I developed weakness in my left leg. And my neurologist tells me that I have multiple sclerosis. I see the best people, I take the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, I'm in a tilt-recline wheelchair.
I find it just amazing that you saw that level of improvement in your condition that quickly by adopting certain protocols. I mean, it's a miracle.
Welcome to Commune. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together.
Dr. Terry Wahls, welcome to the Commune podcast. Great to be with you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So let me begin by just expressing some gratitude for all the protocols that you've developed that helped so many people manage MS specifically, but autoimmune disease, in general. And I am getting acquainted with your Wahls warriors, and your battalion is certainly growing. And, there just can be so much confusion and fear associated with the onset of autoimmune disease. And just, you've given people tremendous agency with your books and with your app. And I know that you have an upcoming autoimmune challenge coming up at the end of August, which we can talk about. But these protocols that can be adopted kind of outside of pharmacology that address health at its root cause have really empowered a lot of people. So thank you. Thank you so much for your work.
It gives people hope.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think hope can translate into agency, and especially the understanding of mechanism, which you do such a great job outlining, allows people to adopt certain particular behaviors in a way where they actually understand what's going on.
I think that's critical. You have to understand, at least a high level, how something can work so that you're willing to put in the effort to change your routine to accommodate these new actions. Because, we don't make changes just because someone told us to. You might have done that when you were a little child, but very quickly, even our children, they won't do things that we tell them unless they understand why. And as adults, we aren't going to take on a new task unless we understand why and the reason.
So I'm excited for you to share your inspirational story of how you leveraged your own healing to create a model for others. And I know a lot of folks that are suffering will not only be uplifted, but will also have a roadmap for returning to health. But I would also think it's helpful to scaffold our conversation in some definitional work so our audience can best understand.
What I'd like to do, Jeff, is to begin with telling people my story of how I became ill and how my life was transformed. So, before entering medical school, I'm an athlete. I compete in full contact taekwondo. I'm a kick 'em up kind of girl. Bronze medalist in the Pan American trials. Enter medical school, do well. But during medical school, I started having electrical discomforts, face pains. About 20 years later, I developed weakness in my left leg. And my neurologist tells me that I have multiple sclerosis. I see the best people, I take the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, I'm in a tilt-recline wheelchair. My neurologist mentions the work of Lauren Cardane. After having been a vegetarian for many years, read his works, his books, and decide to go back to eating meat. Very big deal. I continue to decline. I decide to start reading the basic science and develop a theory that mitochondria are what's driving disability in the setting of MS. And so I begin taking supplements that slow my decline. I'm very grateful, but I'm still declining. My face pains are getting much, much worse. And to think about that, that's like a cattle prod, electrical cattle prod that hits me right here, a jolt of this intense electrical pain for just a second. They're turned on more frequently, they're more difficult to turn off. And by the summer of 2007, I could walk very short distances with 2 walking sticks. Otherwise, I'm in a tilt recline wheelchair. I can't sit up anymore. I am beginning to have some brain fog. My face pain is more frequent, more severe. It's clear to me I'm destined to become likely bedridden, likely demented, quite possibly having to endure the trigeminal neuralgia permanently on. And when it's on, a breeze triggers the pain, light triggers the pain, sound triggers the pain, talking, swallowing, speaking triggers the pain. I have a very grim future, 2007. And that's when I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. I take the course in neuroprotection. I have a longer list of supplements, which I add. And I discover electrical stimulation of muscles. I add that to my physical therapy. And then I had this really big aha. And actually, I'm quite embarrassed now. It took me this long to have this aha. It's like, what if I redesigned my paleo diet based on the science that I've been studying, my mitochondrial nutrients? And so that takes me several more months. I get my diet redesigned. And I eat this new way starting December 26, 2007. By the end of January, so 4 weeks later, my pain is definitely less. My brain fog is less. And at the beginning of February, my physical therapist says, Terry, you're getting stronger. And he advances my little simple mat exercises, and he has me to start lifting weights. Now, mind you, Jeff, these are little tiny weights. But, I'm moving along, and I can sit up. I can have supper with my family at the table. That's a big deal. And then I used to ride my bike with my family a lot, so I asked my wife, think I could try riding the bike again? And says, well, maybe in the fall, things keep going well. Well, 2 weeks later, it's Mother's Day, and I decided I want to try riding my bike. So we have to have this emergency family meeting. My teenage children don't want me to ride the bike because they're afraid, I'll fall and get hurt. But Jack decides that I can try. So she tells my big 6'5", 16-year-old son to jog alongside on the left, my daughter to jog alongside on the right, and she'll follow. And I push off. And I bike around the block. My 16-year-old son is crying. My daughter's crying. My wife's crying. And I'm crying. And when I tell that story, I still cry because that is when my understanding of disease and health has changed. That is when I understand that the current understanding of secondary progressive multiple sclerosis is incomplete. And who knew how much recovery might be possible? And so I kept riding my bike a little bit more every day, doing my little workouts. And in October, I rode 18.5 miles. And once again, my family's crying, my wife's crying, and I'm crying when I cross that finish line. And that fundamentally changed how I approached care in my clinics. It would change the focus of my research, and it would change the mission of my life to let other people with progressive, chronic, complex autoimmune disease know that there's much they can do. And who knows how much recovery might be possible for them as well.
Wow, Terry, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. And clearly, even 14 years later, it's as prescient and salient as it was in that time. And I find it just amazing that you saw that level of improvement in your condition that quickly by adopting certain protocols. I mean, it's a miracle.
And I should let people know that I'd been tinkering with my diet for years. I'd been tinkering with supplements for years. And so it wasn't just the supplements. It wasn't just the diet. It was putting everything together. It was redesign my diet in a very specific way. This very intensive physical therapy that I was doing with my physical therapist, who treated me like an athlete. And being a former athlete, I was willing to go at this at a level of intensity that was quite remarkable, and did lead to this stunning change in a 12-month time period, where it was a struggle to walk, 10 feet, to being able to bike hours.
Wow. Yeah. And, just returning, to an active life with your family. I believe you have 2 children, and I have 3 children. And, one of my greatest joys is going out and just playing badminton with them and just running around. And it's not a preconceived thing that we do. We just, on Sunday afternoon, hey, let's go down there and just, yeah. So to be able to restore that to people's lives, I mean, what more could you do with your life?
And being able to, in January, sit at the table again and sit at my desk at work again. So as you get more and more disabled, these small incremental changes have a huge impact on quality of life. Being able to sit upright and travel be able to go to a movie theater with my family, to go out to a restaurant and sit at the table at a restaurant. Those were things I had not been able to do for years.
So maybe we can zoom out for a moment and just talk about the conundrum of autoimmune disease in general. Could you just provide sort of a broad definition of what is autoimmunity?
Sure. So the immune cells are a really important part of the maintaining and repairing our body from the wear and tear of aging. So they rebuild our body from damage. They protect our body from threats, infection, and internal threats, cancers. So you can think of that as 3 big functions that our immune cells have. When we have an autoimmune disease, the maintenance function has gotten confused. That the immune cells are taking existing tissues that the immune cells are seeing as having been damaged, therefore needing to be dissolved, eaten away, because they're damaged, and they lack the ability to repair them normally. So if you have, for example, a autoimmune skin condition, you may have blistering or plaques or rashes in the skin. You may have damage to your lungs, such as asthma or pulmonary fibrosis or scarring, or in my case, damage to the brain in the myelin, that insulation on the wire between brain cells. Then you have multiple sclerosis and damage that interferes with your normal function in terms of your sensory input or your motor function, that is your muscles, your coordination, your mobility.
So I think the notion of immunity has infiltrated the popular culture right now in the wake of COVID. And if there's any silver lining, and I'm kind of looking for one, it's potentially that there's more public curiosity around medical science and physiology. Though obviously most people associate the immune system with the body's natural defense system, the ability for the body to fight off virus or bacteria, or pathogenic virus or bacteria, I should say. But there seems to be a confusion with autoimmunity where your body can't tell the difference between your own cells and foreign cells. Is that a general understanding?
You can't tell the difference between my cell and the outside cell. I think that's a little incorrect, Jeff. What has happened is my body, my immune cell sees my tissues as having been damaged in some way. And so then I'm like, okay, they're damaged, therefore it has to be replaced. I'm going to pull them out. There's a variation of that called molecular mimicry, where my immune cells have recognized a particular virus or bacteria as foreign, so I know to go kill that. But the same amino acid sequence that's in that virus or bacteria shares an amino acid sequence that's present, say, in the lining of my lung tissue. And so that leads to scarring of the lung or asthma, or it may share the same amino acid sequence in my skin, leading to the skin rashes, or again, in my case, the same amino acid sequence in part of the brain, leading to damage in the brain. So it can be a couple different ways that our body's immune cells can get tripped up with this molecular mimicry concept, or that it's seeing my tissues as having been damaged.
Yeah, so you mention a number of the most prevalent autoimmune diseases. Rheumatoid arthritis is one, psoriasis, obviously multiple sclerosis,
Asthma.
And these diseases present differently, but are there underlying biological pathologies that are shared by all of these different autoimmune diseases?
Absolutely. And some of the first steps that occur is that the microbes that live in and on our body, we know there's a certain healthy mix that you can have, and then there is what is known as a unhealthy mix of bacteria. And you may have too many candida or yeast species, not enough of the lactobacillus or bifidobacter species. In that community is now associated with disease and a much higher rate of autoimmune disease, a higher rate of leakiness of that barrier between the lining of the intestine and your bloodstream. We call that sort of a leaky gut. And when that leaky gut happens, food proteins that haven't been fully digested get into your bloodstream. Bacterial fragments can get into your bloodstream. And that causes the immune cells to be activated, to be making a lot of inflammation molecules because they're on heightened awareness. And these molecules called cytokines increase the probability of developing an autoimmune disease, increase the severity of symptoms if you have an autoimmune disease. And so having that leaky gut is one of the early steps that go wrong. And that can lead to a variety of symptoms that will occur for 5 to 10 years. That's called sort of the prodrome, before people go on to develop the overt autoimmune diagnosis, whether that's rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune thyroid disease, severe asthma.
So I think what you just described there is so essential and crucial for people to understand. You talk about leaky gut, or what some people refer to as intestinal permeability, which is directly associated with our standard American diet. So the overconsumption of sugar, and, processed foods, which we can talk about, alcohol, but also PPIs, NSAIDs, the overprescription of antibiotics, herbicides, and like glyphosate, et cetera, that are essentially breaking down those tight junctures in the epithelial wall that are then leading to this chronic inflammation. But I think the extra step that you just outlined, for me anyways, was that chronic inflammation, that agitation of the immune system, heightens the release of these inflammatory cytokines that then can lead to all these diseases. Now, I wonder...
And it doesn't happen quickly, Jeff.
Right. And it's progressive, which is the amazing thing. Yeah.
It sort of simmers along for years. People in your audience may have had trouble with headaches, migraines. They may have had trouble with really heavy periods, heavy, painful periods that were eventually told that they had cysts and endometriosis. They may have had pelvic pain or painful intercourse, which they just thought, well, okay, that's just life. I just have painful periods. And then finally, someone did an ultrasound and said, oh, I think you actually have endometriosis. Or they may have had a pelvic surgery looking for that severe pelvic pain. And that's when they found out they had the endometriosis. That is where the lining of the endometrium escapes and it makes little cysts on the ovaries, on the colon, on the uterus. And all of that is part of the prodrome as a result of this leaky gut, this overactivated innate immune system that percolates along for 5 to 10 years. And women are more likely to have infertility and have to go through infertility treatments, taking hormones, and perhaps the assisted reproductive technology, GIFT or IVF. And then they finally have their child or a couple children. And then their symptoms are continuing. They may have been told, well, you have a positive anti-nuclear antibody, but it's not high enough to make a clear diagnosis. Your rheumatoid factor isn't high enough to diagnose rheumatoid arthritis yet. So we'll just watch and wait. But the person knows they've been feeling a little worse every year.
Yeah, it's for people in their 20s and 30s that might think to themselves, oh, well, I can eat anything, or, I don't have to worry about this sort of thing because these are diseases of the elderly or of late middle age. But I think what you're describing is that these diseases are progressive and the onset is slow. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in your 50s and it becomes completely debilitating.
Or in your 40s. And if the physicians who had seen them for their chronic headaches or their pelvic pain or endometriosis have put together that this is an autoimmune process that is responsive to addressing diet and lifestyle factors, and taught their patients about diet and lifestyle to address those root causes, then it's quite possible to completely reverse the damage, to completely heal the leaky gut, to lower the inflammatory cytokines, to reverse the positive ANA, to reverse the endometriosis, to reverse the infertility, to resolve the chronic headaches, and never have to go on to develop rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or inflammatory bowel disease. But unfortunately, most conventional physicians have not been taught that connection. And so, they're doing the best they can. They see people, they can't make a diagnosis yet, and just say, well, I don't know. Come back and I'll see you next year.
There's so much to address there. Even just like where the role that primary care physicians play in our medical industry, where they're really unsupported by the insurance industry. And so they're kind of put into this untenable position of just like writing scripts because they've got 15 minutes to see a patient because that's the only way they can make ends meet.
That's a long appointment. If you got 15 minutes, most often it's only 7.
Yeah.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah. So you described a little bit about the upstream condition of leaky gut. I know that you also talk quite a bit about mitochondrial dysfunction as one of the consilient conditions across a lot of these autoimmune diseases. Yeah, can you talk about that a bit?
Well, remind everyone that mitochondria first broke onto the scene about 1.5 billion years ago when the oxygen level rose in the atmosphere and killed off 98% of life, because oxygen was actually a very toxic compound. And fortunately, through evolutionary history, random mutation by random mutation, the Krebs cycle sequence evolved that utilized oxygen to make this wonderful molecule called ATP that our cells use to drive the chemistry of life. And these ancient bacteria that had evolved to make the Krebs cycle were engulfed by bigger bacteria, and this new organism, flourished and was very, very effective. That new organism ultimately becomes the forerunners of animals, and of course, it was a forerunner of us. And these new cells are able to specialize into organs. And so they can specialize into nervous tissue, into bones, into muscles, into glands. In those parts of our bodies, those cells that have to do the most work will have the most mitochondria in them. So things like your brain, your retina, your heart will have the most mitochondria per cell. And my reading, back there in 2004 when I'm in the wheelchair, I developed the theory that disability was being driven by the mitochondria not performing well in the brain. And so I wanted to have these supplements that could help bolster the efficiency of my mitochondria. And those diseases affecting the brain, retina, eyes, and the heart are deeply connected to mitochondrial efficiency. So in my clinical practice, people with the disease complexes or symptoms complexes in those areas, I help them improve the efficiency of the mitochondria. And yeah, part of it is targeted supplements, but we can also think about this in terms of nutrition. If you can think back to ninth grade biology, there was this beautiful oval shape with those squiggles in the middle, and all the squiggles are the cell membranes where those proteins reside that have the Krebs cycle that generate all that ATP. So you need a lot of fat, the correct fats, omega-3, omega-6 fats, to make those cell membranes. You'll need B vitamins. You'll need coenzyme Q. And you need a lot of minerals, particularly magnesium, zinc, selenium, for the mitochondria to work really well. There are a few other things, creatine, carnitine, coenzyme Q, that can also be helpful. And I want to remind everyone that I devised this really elegant supplement cocktail for my mitochondria. And it was helpful because if I didn't take them, I felt worse, but they didn't get me out of the wheelchair. I had to fix my diet, my whole lifestyle to get out of the wheelchair.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's almost like you put yourself through an autodidactic medical school halfway through your career.
Yes, I laugh. That is, getting my MS diagnosis was, my second medical school. So medical school was hard, learned a lot. It was a lot of fun, very intense. And then when I got diagnosed with MS, I learned what it was like to be a patient. That was very humbling. And then I had to go back to basic science to learn all that I could to try and figure out how to. And when I first did all this, Jeff, I did this intense reading, self-experimentation, not to get better, because I was seeing the best people in the country. They had told me very consistently that with secondary progressive MS, it's a progressive disease. There is no recovery. Functions once lost are gone forever. So I was taking these incredibly toxic drugs to slow my decline because I knew recovery wasn't possible. And so as I was tinkering, with my self-care and doing my intensive physical therapy, my electrical stimulation of muscles, and I'm redesigning my diet, I was doing this to slow my decline. I had zero expectation of recovery. In fact, as I was getting better and beginning to walk again, I want to remind people that anyone with a progressive, particularly a progressive neurologic disorder, part of the adaptation is that you finally let go of the future. You finally come to acceptance, like, okay, I will cope by just taking each day as it unfolds. So I was still in the taking each day as it unfolded, thrilled that I could walk a little bit again, thrilled I could walk around the block again, but I didn't know what it meant. It was the day I rode my bike that I was like, wow, how much recovery might be possible?
That must have been just a huge inflection point in
That's why I
in
cry.
your journey. Yeah.
Whatever I talk about that day.
Yeah. The way that you were able to study kind of other cognitive or neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, did that give you any kind of window into developing your protocols? Were there any clues there in the clinical studies that were going on around, some of these?
When I first started going to the basic science, at first I was looking for drug studies. Then I finally had this big aha, like, well, I'm not going to be able to get access to these drugs. I should start looking for things I could access. So that got me down supplement studies. And so I was looking at MS supplement studies. And then I thought, well, but I don't have relapses anymore. This is all just progressive disease. So I should be looking for, and nobody studies progressive MS because people don't get better. So they study relapse remitting MS. So that's like, I got to go to other progressive disorders. So that's when I went to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, the dementias, Huntington's, ALS. And as I was reading, I thought, okay, mitochondria seemed to be the common thread for all of those diseases. Then I got into like, okay, so what do mitochondria need? What do we know about them? How can I better support that? I did not come easily to this, Jeff. I did not come easily to this.
But you did what a scientist really does, which is ask humble questions, right? And pull threads.
And you just kept going and looking. And then, and I had my first little supplement cocktail. I had added them. And after about 6 months, I thought, nothing's happening. And so I quit them. Because I was so annoyed. And then, 24 hours later, I just could not get up out of bed. And on the third day, Jackie came in and said, honey, I think I ought to try your supplements again. So I took them, and the next morning I could get up and go to work. Now, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So 2 weeks later, I did the same experiment. I stopped my little mitochondrial cocktail. 24 hours later, I just really could not get out of bed. I waited 3 days, and I resumed my supplements. And then I was so jazzed. I was very excited to be reading the basic science. I told my institutional review board, and this is the committee that reviews research at the University of Iowa. I said, give me all of the studies that have to do with the brain. And so I got progressively more comfortable with reading brain science and more comfortable with thinking more that, there are things I can do. There are things that I can do.
So let's just talk specifically about MS. Now, you mentioned briefly before, it's essentially the immune system attacks these nerve fibers and the myelin sheathing, I think it's called, which is kind of a fatty substance. I've always heard it kind of, there's a metaphor there with a wire, like an electrical wire that's insulated. And can you talk a little bit about kind of specifically the mechanism of multiple sclerosis. And then, as you began to identify this degradation of myelin as one of the key issues, how you then developed a protocol or an understanding of what are the building blocks of myelin. You were just doing this it sounds like it just makes total sense, but you were just dissecting the issue and just putting one foot in front of the other.
I suppose it begins with supplements that I'm zeroed in on mitochondria. That I start having a deeper understanding of what are the nutrients that mitochondria need, and then coming back to myelin and understanding myelin. We presently think the immune cells are attacking the myelin, and it's sort of a spotty lesions appear in the spinal cord, in the brain, and so it's not all myelin that's destroyed, but it destroys myelin in particular at a spot. You might have one spot or two spots or four spots or 20 spots. And so the current understanding is that we will give you a drug that interferes with your immune cells' function in some capacity, either blunting them all globally or blunting a particular step. No one has had the approach of, well, what do we need to make myelin? So I began to think about that. Well, what do we know? What are the scientists saying that we need for brain cells? What are the scientists saying that we need for making myelin? And so there were a few review papers that talked about some of these nutrients with vitamins and minerals, essential fats, that basically is about making sure you have plenty of great nutrition. It's embarrassing to go back and look at, what did I learn in medical school about nutrition? Low-fat diet, avoid cholesterol, use margarine instead of butter. And that was sort of like all that I really remember from my nutrition that I got in medical school. And then during residency, did I get any nutrition? Again, it was avoid cholesterol, use margarine, avoid butter, avoid eggs. And so I had followed a very low-fat diet, legumes, rice, vegetables. So it certainly looked like a very heart-healthy diet. As I, got more curious that mitochondria were the solution, and what do brain cells need, then fat, because myelin is fat, and cell membranes are the fatty parts of the cell membrane that are wrapped again and again and again to make the myelin. And it's like, okay, that turns out to need cholesterol, omega-3 fats, so eicosapetanoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid, that's in cold water fish, grass-fed, grass-finished meats. Omega-6 fats, those are in nuts and seeds. Flax oil, hemp oil would be good sources of those as well. Because you and I, we lack the molecular machinery to make the omega-3 bond or the omega-6 bond. And those fats are essential for our cell membrane. They're essential for some of our neurotransmitters. So you have to eat those. We also need to have cholesterol. While we can make cholesterol, if you're on a very, very low-fat diet, sometimes your blood cholesterol levels are so low you can't make enough sex hormones, cortisol hormones, and you're having difficulty having enough cholesterol for your cell membranes as well. So a very low-fat diet can get you into trouble that way.
Yeah. What was the standard of care at the point where, you were doing some of this research? What was the typical standard of care?
So the standard of care would be to take a disease-modifying drug. And in the 2000, when I was diagnosed, that would have been one of the interferons, such as Avonex or beta-seron, or a decoy protein called Paxone. And then if you, at the point that you converted to the progressive phase of the illness, then you take a form of chemotherapy called mitochondrial, which, by the way, gives you a 2% chance of converting to leukemia each time you take it, plus it's toxic to your heart, so it increases the probability of heart failure. So it's certainly a very, very toxic drug. And there's a limit to how many total doses that you can get in your lifetime. So that was the next thing that I took. There was zero emphasis on diet. You're basically told, eat what you want, enjoy your life. It doesn't really matter. Fortunately, my physicians did check for B vitamin, B12. Not everyone knows to check for B12. And they did suggest that since I'd been a vegetarian, to take a B12 supplement, which I did do. Although I will give my neurologist credit, they were the one who introduced me to the work of Lauren Cordain, and did mention the work of Ashton Embry. So reading their two papers in their books, that led me to the decision and it was a big decision at the time, to abandon the vegetarian, low-fat vegetarian diet and go back to eating meat.
I want to begin to probe your dietary recommendations and the different kind of forms of paleo diet that exist out there. I guess before that, I wanted to ask, are there certain risk factors associated with MS? Or essentially, are some demographics more predisposed to developing it?
Well, we know that the further you are from the equator, the higher the rates of multiple sclerosis. We also know that people, Caucasians and African Americans, have higher rates of multiple sclerosis than people who are Asian or Latino. We also know that smokers are at higher risk, and that if you have a parent or sibling, your risk will increase 2 to 5% compared to the general population. And that there's probably a interplay between genes, and there's 200 to 300 different genes that increase the risk for autoimmunity, whether it's MS, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, or any of the hundreds of other autoimmune disease states. But the vast majority of people who have one of those genetic genes don't develop the autoimmune disease. So it's an interplay between the genes that we have, my smoking history, my lifetime of diet choices, physical activity, toxin exposures, probably my microbiome, my family, my self-talk, that all interplay to lead to the prodrome, and then the autoimmune diagnosis. And then if I don't address the root causes, every 5 to 10 years, an additional autoimmune diagnosis will develop.
Do you think that there is any correlation between lack of kind of UVB exposure? There's in many diseases, there's low vitamin D levels, and you mentioned because of people that are farther from the equator. So I wonder if getting out and getting a little bit of sun is not a bad idea.
Yeah. So certainly having a low vitamin D status is associated with much higher rates of autoimmunity and anxiety and depression and insulin resistance and preterm labor and a lot of poor health issues. So our ancestors for millions of years were outside in sunlight 24/7. And now we live and work inside, and we do our recreation inside. And because of the association between ultraviolet radiation and skin cancer, when we go outside, we either put on sun shirts or sunscreens to make sure we don't get a tan and a sunburn, but it also means that we won't make vitamin D.
Yeah, I think you just built a beautiful bridge, I think, into the next section of the conversation, because you reference of evolution and how there's certain adaptive mechanisms to what it is to be human that were developed over millions of years, or at least hundreds of thousands of years. And then, but we've changed our culture such that culture is outpacing evolution, if you will. So you mentioned, okay, we used to spend the majority of our time outside. I think the last statistic I read, at least in the Western world, we spend 94% of our time inside. And then, of course, it's not just our exposure to the sun. It's also our diet that has changed so much. And we have just, with our standard American diet and a diet that focuses on refined grains and refined sugars and processed foods that have made artificially cheap to be produced under the true cost of production, which is a whole nother conversation to do with our farm bill and our agricultural industry. But I think, I'd love for you to kind of pull a little bit on this notion of becoming the modern day hunter gatherer, which I've heard you call yourself, but I love that idea. And it's a beautifully coined phrase.
And clearly when humans originated in equatorial Africa, we expand up to northern Africa, meet the Neanderthals, have 100,000-year war, and eventually we absorb the Neanderthals, and you and I have 2 to 5% Neanderthal DNA, and so we're a little bit Neanderthal. But then we migrate into northern Europe, across to Asia, Australia, North and South America. So humans eat a wide variety of things in a wide variety of ecosystems. And then in the last 10,000 years, we radically changed our diet, made it very narrow. We have the agricultural food supply. And then we changed it radically again with the Industrial Revolution. And then we changed it again with the confinement and confined agricultural animal feeding operations. And so now the meat that people consume is, at least here in the United States, is largely from confined animal feedlot operations. So these animals are never outside. They're eating grain. They're not eating grass. And so that meat is radically different than the meat my ancestors would have had, your ancestors 10,000 years ago. That meat is relatively low in vitamin K2. So there are some observations that the vitamin K2 levels have plummeted, which has some big health consequences in terms of how we mineralize our teeth, our bones, how our mitochondria work, and how we make myelin, and how brain stem cells mature. We don't have as much vitamin D, vitamin A, B vitamins, or minerals in the meat. And this is based on USDA statistics that they've been accumulating on our meat, apple, since I think 1913. And the vitamin and mineral content of our foodstuffs have sharply declined over the last 100 years because we have changed how we farm. So even if I'm trying to have be a modern day hunter-gatherer, so I'm eating vegetables, berries, meat, fish, eggs, those products, because they are being produced in a very different way, are less nutritious than they were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So that makes it challenging.
I mean, I start to think about CAFOs, which are these confined animal feeding operations that you mentioned. And yeah, I mean, we're force feeding our cattle grain when they're evolved to digest grass, and then we're inoculating them full of antibiotics. I start to actually think about their physiological status. They probably actually all have leaky gut too.
They have leaky gut. They have metabolic syndrome. They have a shortened lifespan.
Right. So they're insulin resistant. They're full of cortisol, and then that's what we're eating.
And we've created this circumstance where we are trying to figure out how to feed, 3 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion. I think I don't know what our population in the world is now. Maybe 8 billion. So I realize that governments and our agricultural community is trying to figure out how to feed everyone. I think back to World War II, when it was the patriotic duty to have a garden, and it was expected that we build cook our meals at home and we would eat together. In my clinics at the VA, when we created the therapeutic lifestyle clinic, and we taught people how to implement, the kind of diet approach that I have to health. One of the observations we had, Jeff, is people don't know how to meal plan. They don't know how to shop or plan for leftovers or how to cook. So in addition to teaching people about leaky gut and the root cause of their disease and all that they could do, we would teach them how to cook. We'd teach them how to meal plan. We'd teach them how to plan for leftovers. And I would teach them how to do this using a very limited financial means, because my folks were disabled, living on food stamps, shopping in small rural grocery stores in Iowa and northern Missouri, western Illinois, and we had people transform their lives living on food stamps, implementing basically the Wahls protocol. So when people tell me, "Hey Terry, I can't do that because I'm not a doctor. I can't spend all of that money going to Whole Foods." And I'm like, well, I assure you, my farmers in northern Missouri and southern Iowa were not going to Whole Foods either. They were going to their local grocer, and yes, they were using conventional foods. And we taught them how to do some, rice and beans and some vegetarian meals to make this more affordable for them. So you don't have to do this as a paleo eater, although I certainly encourage meat. You will greatly benefit from learning how to cook. You'll greatly benefit from learning how to meal plan and how to plan for leftovers, and eating up all of your foods. You're not throwing away your groceries.
I was interviewing Paul Hawken. He gave me a statistic that was just staggering, that 33% of all the food that we buy ends up in the garbage.
And it's taking up 25% of the landfill.
Right.
It's a huge burden. And I think that's because we've not taught people how to meal plan so that they can use up all of their food.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into your particular signature on the paleo diet, and maybe you could address the paleo diet kind of at a high level, and then we can kind of go more granular in terms of what are the building blocks for to synthesize myelin or neurotransmitters, or what feeds biogenesis, essentially the creation of new mitochondria.
So the paleo diet is trying to help you take what's available in your grocery store now, wherever that is, uh, uh, into reconstruct a diet that looks more like what our ancestors would have eaten. So on a really high level, the protein source is meat, poultry, fish, eggs if you tolerate them. And then you're not having grains or added sugars, but you are having a lot of vegetables. It might be tubers. So yeah, it could be potatoes, yams, squashes, cabbages, onions, mushrooms, berries, and fruit. And that's what you're having. And it's not that we're importing foods from a different continent or across the continents. You're getting foods ideally that are in season and locally available. And so if you're in Canada, you're eating a slightly different set of food than if you're in Florida or you're in Africa or Australia, because I want you to eat, the protein sources and vegetables and fruits that are native to your area. The paleo folks really focused on what to avoid, which was grains, sugars, processed foods. They didn't put a whole lot of guidance into what to eat. When I had my recovery, it's because I put a lot of guidance into like, okay, what do I have to eat to get everything to work? And originally it was based on the list of 18 different nutrients, and actually it's now 34 that I track that I want to be sure everyone has. And I had a long list of foodstuffs that I knew I needed to eat every week. Well, when I started teaching my vets that, I realized I couldn't possibly give them a list. That's just not teachable. It's not implementable. So then I had to go back to thinking like, okay, I need to have something that I could teach in just a couple minutes, that people could remember, and you could use to guide you to mostly get those 34 things that I want you to have. And that's where I came up with 6 to 12 ounces of protein, and that's 2 palm-size servings of meat, fish. And then I have a largely male clientele at the VA, and so this was for tall women and men. So it's 9 cups of vegetables and fruit. And Jeff, this will make you laugh. My vets would say, "Now, is that per week or month?" And I said, "No, that's per day." And they go like, "What?
How is that possible?"
Yeah. And so it's like 3 cups of green leafy vegetables, 3 cups of cabbage, onion, mushroom family vegetables, 3 cups of deeply pigmented. And there's no need to make yourself overfull. So, I mean, if you're hungry, eat more vegetables and berries if you've already had your 12 ounces of meat. If you are a petite lady, and we had some very petite people in my clinics and in my clinical trials. So if you're, 4'10" lady, you're not going to get 9 cups of vegetables in. You're going to get maybe 6 ounces of meat because your palms are much smaller than mine, and maybe it's going to be 4 to 5 cups of vegetables, and that's fine. This is the starting point. This is not the ending point. This is where you start and you adapt. And if you're one of my gentlemen who you're doing construction work, you're doing a lot of heavy manual labor, then yes, you're going to maybe need more protein. And you'll maybe be having 15 servings, 15 cups of vegetables.
One of the micronutrients that I've heard you mention that was really very new to me, not really particularly on my radar day to day, was sulfur, kind of as the building blocks of neurotransmitters and also what feeds mitogenesis and supports our mitochondria. And Can you talk about where we can find sulfur in our food?
The sulfur vegetables, cabbage family, onion family, mushrooms have sulfur in them, particularly the cabbage family, well, and the onion family as well. That will boost your ability to process, eliminate toxins. It will boost your brain's ability to make neurotransmitters, particularly the calming neurotransmitter, gamma aminobutyric acid. It will boost your cell's ability to make glutathione, which is sort of the master antioxidant, which is very protective for your mitochondria. And then, some of the things that can boost mitochondrial efficiency is not eating.
Okay, I was going to ask you about this, what your viewpoint is, because fasting, intermittent fasting, water fasting, a myriad different fasting techniques is certainly in the zeitgeist right now. A lot of people discussing it. I wonder what your general position is on it.
So let's go back to our ancestral mothers and fathers. When we separated from the primates 6 million years ago, when our genus emerged 2 million years ago, food was plentiful, sort of. If there was a drought, it wasn't around. If the hunt was good, it was around. And then if the hunt was not good, we'd be hungry. And furthermore, in order to get the hunt, our men, our ancestral fathers, would travel. They would literally run down the prey. We weren't stronger, we weren't faster, but we could sweat and we could endure. We could just keep jogging slowly after them, and eventually the wildebeest would keel over from heat exhaustion. And our ancestral dads would hike up the wildebeest and carry it 9 miles home. The ladies were sort of, having a 1 to 1.5 mile range where we are gathering. And by the way, we made little nuts, and we were good at small game in tubers, in leaves, and the fruit there would have been much smaller, not like the starchy bananas and apples that we get to enjoy now. And the social compact was we'd fix ancestral dad's meal, feed him, and then we'd get to eat. And so you'd have periods of plentiful food and periods of no food, or periods of intense physical activity to get the food. So the intense physical activity is great driver for more mitochondria. Periods of absent food is a great driver to make more mitochondria. A driver to make fewer mitochondria is continuous eating. If you want to make your mitochondria less effective, sickly, and fewer in number, eat all of the time, snack all day long. So my advice is stop the snacking. First go to 3 meals a day. And then if you're up to it, 2 meals a day. And then if you're up to it, 1 meal a day. And then if you want to be more adventuresome, occasionally skip a day. If you want to be more adventuresome still, occasionally skip 2 days. But there's no need to rush into this. If you rush into a fasting strategy too quickly, you'll just give yourself migraines, headaches, you'll feel miserable, and it'll be a terrible experience. Take your time for those transitions.
Yeah, I think you point out something that can be almost globalized, where the body works like the yin and the yang. There's crests and troughs. There's growth, and then there's protective measures or restoration. almost every hormone has its counterpart. Insulin has glucagon, neurotransmitters for every serotonin or oxytocin. There's the adrenaline and norepinephrine. When we align ourselves with the adaptive foundational wisdom of nature, we find this balance. So we have these different cellular pathways like mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR, which is very growth oriented. But then we have AMPK, which is a different cellular pathway that in a fasted state, we can activate that. And that seems to be quite good for our mitochondria. So this idea of scarcity and abundance, we actually evolved adaptively for that kind of circumstance. But now, again, culture has outpaced evolution, where we can access any kind of fruit in season, out of season, 24/7, in the palm of our hand. And that seems to be getting ourselves into a lot of trouble.
There's some beautiful charts that look at the map of biochemistry. In that life has evolved over, I believe, about 3 billion years through random mutations to be self-corrected chemistry with checks and balances. And if we look at this big, beautiful map of biochemistry, much of our biochemical pathways are common in bacteria, plants, animals, fungi, across many species, which allow us to do many animal studies to deepen understanding of disease states very cost effectively. And the NIH loves to fund those kinds of studies. It is a great way to understand physiology. But if we think that we could take a single molecular pathway and use a drug to create health, we miss the fact that the map is so richly interconnected. If you look at just one pathway, you forgot that it's connected and has a lot of checks and balances, and so missing with that one path won't lead to health. You have to support all of the paths that you can.
Yeah, it's funny that in physics, we seem to have quite easily moved from kind of linear Newtonian mechanistic physics to quantum physics, which is essentially a roadmap for what we could be learning here in medical science. And of course, you're on the pioneer side of it all.
Yeah, whenever you're a pioneer, in the beginning, they hate you. They call you a lunatic and worse.
Right.
And if you have a really new idea, when you go to publish your findings, you can't get it published. It's enormously difficult. You have to go to a very, very low impact journal. And then you do that for your first several papers, then a somewhat higher impact journal, then a somewhat higher impact journal, and then all at once you get the Nobel Prize in medicine.
I'm happy to know that people are slowly getting on the bandwagon, and I'm sure it wasn't easy at the beginning to forge a new path because Western medicine. Yeah,
I feel very kindly towards them because it is true for all of us, for me and for you. Our current understanding of the life and world, we're going to cling to. We will not give up our understanding easily. And we'll need overwhelming evidence presented to us again and again before we would let go of our current understanding. And so for my colleagues in neurology who have the current understanding, it will take a lot of evidence again and again for them to let go of that. But I do see progress being made. I do see more presentations at the scientific meetings, clinical meetings that I go to for MS, that there are presentations now about diet in the critical role of diet and all the research that's being done about diet and lifestyle, quality of life, fatigue. There are studies being published more and more about the benefit of a stress-reducing practice. about the critical role of exercise to protect the brain. So it is happening. It is the nature of humans that we don't give up our current understanding of the world easily.
Yes, just ask Copernicus. You mentioned a de-stressing, and I've heard you talk a little bit about meditation in your books and your talks, but I wonder if you have a regular meditation practice and if that's something that you recommend as part of your overall protocol.
When I was in college, I learned how to do transcendental meditation. I stopped during medical school. I don't know why. When I was diagnosed with MS and I knew that stress made my symptoms worse, I did not go back to transcendental meditation. I don't know why. I wish I had. I did go back to meditation. I like exercise. I would rather exercise than meditate, but over time I've realized that I have to spend more time meditating. I am back to being very careful to do 20 minutes meditation in the morning, 20 minutes of meditation in the evening. And when I do that, my sleep score and my Oura ring is vastly better. And I'm like, okay, I am paying attention. And that I wish I could use that 20 minutes on my workout side, but my sleep is better, my health is better if I take the 20 minutes to meditate in the morning and in the evening. And so I've been adjusting my life to be sure that I maintain that. I think we all have to sort out what's going to fit into our life, how much time I can put into my exercise, how much time I can put into my meditation, how much time I'm going to put into my work. I will say one of the best things I did, Jeff, was retire from the VA so that I could put a little more time into my self-care routine. Because when I was still working full-time at the VA and doing my research and then doing my business where I was educating the public and clinicians, I didn't have enough time to do my self-care. And so making a decision to retire from the VA gave me the time that I could do the amount of self-care that I really need.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that people understand that self-care isn't indulgent or a luxury per se. It's like, what use are you to the world if you are not your best self or if you are not well? So it's actually, it's not a project of the ego at all. It's actually, this is how I can be of greater utility, is if, I do have my meditation practice, for example. And, we know that high stress hormones are very associated with a lot of disease. So it makes complete sense if we can consciously engage in moving from kind of sympathetic overload into a parasympathetic state. Well, that's going to have knock-on impacts in terms of our hormones, right? And that's going to change our physiology.
I'm very, very fortunate after having 27 years of relentlessly worsening trigeminal neuralgia with profound levels of pain that I've had to endure, that I now see that trigeminal neuralgia as this amazing gift because I have this continuous barometer of the level of inflammation of my cervical spinal cord and of my brain. Because if my inflammation is going up, if my microglia are activated and calling out their pro-inflammation producing molecules, my trigeminal neuralgia will turn on and the electrical face pain will turn on and I will be in a profound level of pain. And I have the opportunity then to sit down with my wife and go like, well, what do you think the trigger was? How am I doing in my self-care? What could I do better? And so now, what had been such a difficult burden I now see as actually this amazing gift. I don't have to go to the MRI center and get an MRI to know the activity of what's going on in my brain. I can just sort of dial into, well, have I had any episodes of face pain in the last 6 months or not? And I've taught my neurologist that trick. So she's now talking to her patients about how they could use their neurologic symptoms as the barometer of their level of inflammation in their central nervous system as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also a product of meditation is to become more physiologically self-aware, where you can actually body scan. Because I think we become very disassociated with actually how we feel. And it's totally understandable. I mean, we're busy, we're getting pinged and dinged and distracted by external agents in this kind of an external world. But just to take, that 20 minutes in the morning and in the evening to essentially just check in with your own vehicle and really see if you can feel and key in on what might be feeling a little bit more inflamed, to develop kind of an intuitive sense, not just a gut instinct, but an actually refined sense for what is happening in your body, and then be able to address it with very sensical kind of protocols, which is, what you've been able to outline in a way that is extremely actionable for people.
Yeah. We know that those individuals who maintain their sense of internal locus of control, that, yep, there are things I can do with my diet, with my self-care, my meditation, my exercise routine, that will adjust or change my health trajectory. The people with a higher internal locus of control have more effective natural killer cells, more effective immune cells, have calmer adaptive and calmer innate immune systems than those who have a very low sense of internal control, that I've given all of my control to my physicians, that those individuals will have a more accelerated rate of decline in their autoimmune disease.
So I know that you have an autoimmune challenge coming up at the end of August. And just to timestamp this episode, we're speaking on the 1st of August, 2022. So I believe this is launching at the very end of August. What can people expect from that particular challenge?
What I do is we take people through 5 days, and I give them a short lesson on reinforcing that internal locus of control. That is where it begins. We have to grow your sense of control, that there are things that you can do. I will give you a little overview of what's happening with autoimmunity, complex chronic diseases, what's changed in the last 100 years, and I'll put it through the lens of the United States. And then we'll talk about a small, identifiable next step that you could take in your journey for whatever complex chronic disease that you have. I'll put it through the lens of autoimmunity. So this is relevant if you have multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune thyroid disease, asthma, psoriasis, or if you're in that prodrome state where you have chronic migraine, headache, endometriosis, infertility, anxiety, depression.
Well, fantastic. We'll be sharing that, and it'll be in the notes as well. So I'll be tuning in for sure. And I'm going to ask you the most important question I will certainly ask this week, which is, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today?
Well, I had a great sleep last night. My Oura Ring gave me one of my highest sleep scores. So I'm feeling really, really good. And I had a great conversation today with my research team. We're working on our next research protocol that'll be targeting progressive MS. Because most of the studies are done with relapsing remitting MS, and we have a study going on for that population right now. And so the next study that we'll be doing will be targeting progressive MS. So I'm very excited about that.
And would you categorize yourself as cured, or is that even a word, really?
When we think of cure, it's like if I've taken an antibiotic for a infection, I'm cured, I'm done with the antibiotic, and the disease is completely over. I'm recovered. I can bike for hours, hike for hours. I have a rich and full life. If I go back to my previous diet and lifestyle, my pain will be back and I'll be incapacitated. So I am recovered, yes. I don't think anyone will ever be cured from their autoimmune disease. We can help you recover, help you have a full, rich, a meaningful life. But if you go back to your previous poor diet and lifestyle, you will likely experience a recurrence of whatever your autoimmune symptoms are. But we can certainly help you recover and once again achieve a rich and full life.
Well, Dr. Terry Wahls, thank you just so much for this conversation, but really more generally for being brave enough and vulnerable enough to put yourself out there in the public and really use your own journey to create a global model for health. And I know that you must get a lot of positive reinforcement from people reaching out to you, but I think that's only a speck on the pinhead in terms of the people that you're helping and influencing and really giving agency. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
And thank you for all that you do as well, Jeff.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.